think we're live.
Live? Okay. It's 2 o'clock, which means it's time for Tax Talk Tuesdays. We do this every Tuesday. We come to you, we give you some area of the tax code that we think is going to be valuable, something that's going to add benefit and definitely enhance your life. So, thank you for tuning in. I'm going to wait a couple of minutes because I'm really excited about what we're going to be sharing today. And we have a guest, Joy Smith Trunk, one of the baddest CPAs in the Washington, D.C. area. I'd probably put my money up against her and, I would say probably the whole U.S. So I want to make sure my feed comes up and I want to make sure people can hear me. If you can hear me, let me know you can hear me and let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you have a business, why don't you go ahead and drop the name of your business in the comment section? This video is probably going to be viewed a lot, so it's definitely an opportunity for you to get some free advertising and drop your website. So if you can hear me, let me know you can hear me. Okay, I see one of my really good friends who I actually talked to last night. He just joined in. Thank you, Peyton, for joining in. And we're going to be talking about showing you the money once again. So you have a tax attorney and you have a CPA live with you today, and all of us are about numbers and money and helping you guys be successful. So I'm going to start. My name is Beverly Winstead. I am a tax controversy attorney. I practice here in the Washington, D.C. area. You know, a lot of you may say, well, what does a tax controversy attorney do? We help people typically resolve disputes with the IRS. And if you don't have any disputes with the IRS, we certainly help you to, as I like to say, keep more of your cash and the IRS off your assets. So today we're going to be talking about actually getting the cash and also how you can comply with the laws, the CARES Act in particular, to make sure that your loan, your PPP loan, is forgivable. So, brief recap. If you don't know what the PPP loan is, then I mean, I don't know. You had to have been, I would say, probably in Canada or somewhere this year. So again, I'm gonna let one of the baddest CPAs. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Joy also. And Joy, why don't you just share a little bit about your practice and what you are doing and what you have been doing? I'm sure you're just as tired as I am. I mean, this year has been
Yeah,
crazy. You know.
overwhelming, but yes, my name is Joy Sistrunk of Premier Group. We are a CPA firm that works with government contractors, nonprofits, and other small businesses to get all of their compliance and tax needs together. And as Beth said, PPP, you had to live in Canada or Mexico, somewhere in a far, far away land, not to know what PPP is. But just in case, that's the Paycheck Protection Program. It's one of the programs that Bev and I talked. We think they've issued two rounds of PPP funds because there was the first round, there were some challenges, and then there was the second round. But it's to help small businesses help pay their employees by giving them 2.5 months worth of payroll support. And so that is what Paycheck Protection Program was. Actually, the program, the final leg, just closed on Saturday, the 8th. And
Right.
so we are, I don't know, we don't really know what's next, quite honestly. So that's what we're here to talk about today.
Right. We don't know what's next, but we want to make sure that our listeners, our viewers are positioned for two things. Number one, we want to make sure that you're positioned to hopefully get the forgiveness that, that's why what made this program so great. And then we also wanted to bring awareness that there could quite possibly be another round. I don't want to say a second round, even though that's where everybody's having it, because like Joy said, hey, there was some funding that was earlier this year, and then there was additional funding that was added. And now we anticipate that there will be additional funding that's going to come out. I would say probably September.
Yeah.
Originally, we thought it was going to be right after. Well, we thought it was going to be before the congressional session ended, but it looks like it's not going to be until September. Okay. All right. So Joy, like I said, I don't know about you, but I'm just tired. I feel like I have not worked so hard in my life. And every time I think we're going to let up, something else happens. So
Yeah.
right now, as you stated, PPP loan applications actually just closed on Saturday. It was Saturday, August 8th. Where
Mhm.
are we now? Where do we sit now?
So now we've been getting tons of calls, I'm sure you have as well, about we had, because originally with PPP you had 8 weeks, then it went to 24 weeks. At this point, quite a few people, I'm going to say most people, have probably used up all of their PPP funding, and they're thinking, oh my goodness, I really have to get this forgiveness application in. Where we are, and what we're telling our clients specifically, is we want to wait at least 30 to 45 days until Congress comes back into session to even start forgiveness, because banks are taking forgiveness, but the rules aren't set in stone yet. And before Congress left, they were talking about forgiving all loans under $150,000. So if that's the case, we would be doing a lot of running around and paperwork for almost nothing. Because if they forgive a blanket amount, then you don't have to do anything. They're just going to automatically convert this to a grant. And so I just want to sit tight. I'm saying around September 15th or so, let's start looking to see, all right, because by then they'll be back. They'll have fought it out, and they should have a plan to move forward. That is our hope. And I just don't think at this point we need to rush around and submit a bunch of stuff until we know for sure.
Yeah, I'm totally. I want to make sure because I'm muted for a second. Can you hear
Oh, I
me?
can.
Okay,
I can.
great. I'm muted. So I totally agree with you. I don't even. I know some banks have put out their applications for their consumers to begin to submit their application. One of the things we're advising our clients also is just kind of to sit fast to see what happens with Congress. A lot of our clients, yeah, we were able to get people PPP loans and even idle funding. Um, the range of loans varied, which brings me, how successful do you think the PPP program actually was?
I think initially, when people got the funding, it actually helped a lot of people to kind of support and prop their businesses up at a time when we were all trying to figure out what the heck is going on, what's next. And so initially it was successful. Now that people are running out of the funds, if you didn't use that time wisely enough to really look forward, I think people are starting to struggle again. And that's why you see the unemployment numbers starting to creep up, because now that the PPP funds are gone, people don't know how they're going to pay their employees. We're still only at, what are most places are in phase 2. Some people are rolling back to phase 0. And so I think unemployment wise, without that funding, most businesses aren't really sure how they're going to maintain their employee headcount.
Right. So I was actually reflecting on this question when the funding was originally announced. You saw the big companies get it. You saw Ruth Chris, they got $10 million. They eventually gave it back because of public outcry. You saw Potbelly get funds and they also gave it back. So definitely the larger banks, which the PPP had to come through the banks, I do
Mm-hmm.
believe that they failed the small business,
Oh, wow.
person. So if you are a small business owner and you are watching this broadcast, you absolutely want to consider whether or not you want to do banking with a larger bank or whether or not you want to do a community-based banks. You and I both help clients apply for PPP, and I know my experience was it was definitely the smaller banks that did a much better job of processing the PPP loans, right?
Not
So,
just processing, I would also say being available to answer questions, because there was a lot of confusion, and the smaller banks just were more accessible and had people on the front lines who could literally answer questions and handhold people through the process. Where the big banks, it was literally sink or swim. If you couldn't figure out how to get their stuff uploaded, get it in their portal, they left you high and dry for the most part. So
Right. And what I appreciated about the smaller banks also is that I actually ended up having a lot of the bankers' cell phone numbers. They just gave me their
Mhm.
cell phone number. So I was able to text them questions. I was able to just get them on the phone and just say, hey, this is the problem that I'm having. So shout out, and I'm going to name a couple of smaller banks because I just think they went above and beyond the call of duty. Definitely First National Bank was an amazing bank to work with. Harbor Bank also was very responsive. They were a little slow, but they were very responsive in terms of getting, our clients' needs met. And I'm sure there were credit unions and other small banks that, were very, like I said, small business owner friendly.
Right.
Okay. All right. In terms of people that got the funding, are you aware of the people that actually got the funding? Did you get a chance to, I don't know, do any research to figure out who actually, what industries got funding?
They did not, I haven't seen the research on what industries. I do know the second, what we're calling either the second or 1B, the 1B round was able to be extended so long because they specifically kind of laser focused in on smaller business and making sure they had access to the capital. So much so that even some of the associations started plugging people in to get the help they needed. Because I think a lot of concern was around, especially for small business owners, was do I actually qualify for it? Does it
Right.
make sense? And so they didn't think that or they just didn't think it was going to work for them. So they did a much better job on that 1B round of making sure it was targeted to small businesses.
Okay, so I actually did a little research because I'm always curious as to what industries are getting the funding, right? So I saw that the construction industry got about 13% of the funding. The
Wow.
professional, scientific, and technical services got almost 13% of the funding, which makes sense because if you're a CPA and attorney and all this other stuff, I just feel
Yeah.
like we were the ones that definitely
Going
had the
for
wherewithal to go ahead and apply.
it.
Another industry that got a lot of the funding, well, 12% manufacturing. Then you had healthcare and social sciences, social assistance, 12%.
Hmm.
And then accommodation and food services got 9%. Retail trade got 9%. And then the list kind of goes down, so the industries that got it, it varies.
Mhm.
Construction, it's interesting to see construction because I've always, I kind of deal with few construction clients, and I know a lot of them actually pay like they do a lot of contracting, you know.
Mhm. It did.
So and it kind of depends on how they were structured, the amount of money that they actually received, right? So, and I don't know if the stats that I pull actually had to do with the amount of loans, or when I say the amount of loans numerically given, or the amount of funding
Funding
giving.
given. Right.
That would be
'Cause-
interesting.
right.
Okay.
That will be, I think we'll see a lot more of that dissection as they go back to audit and see who got what, because that's going to be, especially because you saw some of the bigger companies in there, they've already said anybody over $2 million, they're going to be looking at them. So they're, of course, then everybody wanted to give their money back because no one wants them to come in and look at their books. So it's
Yes.
going to be interesting to see over the next year or two how this shakes out behind the scenes from this.
Right. So speaking of audit, which brings me to, I think you posted an article, I want to say over the weekend, about PPP fraud.
Oh,
Eh,
yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you found in that article?
Well, there were people in Georgia, 5 of them, in fact, who submitted identical PPP applications for different businesses that they had. Well, all they did was change the tax ID number and the name on the forms. And so they submitted fraudulent forms and they submitted fraudulent documentation. And they each got these $1 million. And so it was 5 of them. So they were somehow, I don't know what raised the flag, but and it could be because one of them bought a car. I want to say it was a Range Rover. They were the DOJ actually is going to prosecute them. All 5 people have been arrested. They recovered $3 million in cash, a couple cars, some jewelry. And so what we're seeing now is, and you and I were talking about it briefly, I don't think people realize that your documentation, you're not just submitting it to the bank, you are submitting it to the SBA. And so this becomes a federal crime because you lied on these applications, whether it's PPP or EIDL. If you don't have support, they are actively going to be looking at inconsistencies, and they may even compare the data. I have a strong feeling that they're going to at some point compare the data to the IRS to see, did what you say on these applications, does it line up? And if it doesn't line up, there's going to be, you're going to be getting notices and letters, and they may even come knocking on your door. And I
Yeah.
don't, personally, we don't want that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So, and this is stuff that we've been sharing all along. When it comes to this, a lot of money is being pushed out into the economy, and the checks and balances, uh, really Congress and the SBA and the banks, they're relying on you to have integrity when you submit your application, right? They're relying on you for your numbers to be verified and true and accurate. The bank is not going to have a culpability if you submitted things fraudulently. So that's the thing you absolutely need to be aware of. What happens at this point if you know that, let's say, maybe you did do something fraudulently? What would kind of be your recommendation? I'm just curious if a client came to you and say, look, I didn't really understand the consequences. Somebody came to me and told me they can help me, they can guarantee that they could get me $150,000 in PPP funds, right? Or
Well,
idle funds. What would be your recommendation at this point in time?
me personally, I would say that we should return it. We should return the portion that we can't justify as soon as that opens, and just say, hey, self-report. Because if you get, it's almost like anything else. If you report it before they come to you, your chances of throwing yourself on the mercy of the courts, to me, is better than just waiting for them to come and look for you. Because they will, I have a strong sense this is going to be a heavily prosecuted and a heavily audited area that they're coming. So if you know it's wrong, it's better to get in front of it than
Yeah,
to.
I totally agree. And it's even much better when you have an attorney that's helping you to get in front of it, right? That's
Yes.
going to work with you and try to protect you against, some of the criminal exposure that you have.
I was gonna say, because it's gonna be civil and criminal. That's what people don't. So not only, so it wasn't $150,000. By the time you turn around, they add civil and criminal penalties. That could turn into $300,000. So was it worth it?
Right.
Or it couldn't have been worth it for whatever you purchased with those dollars.
Right. So let's talk about, now that the funds have been spent, the
Mm-hmm.
PPP funds, and a business is still struggling, what would you recommend?
So one, we specifically told a lot of our clients to, one, apply for the EIDL as well if you haven't done so already, so you can have those additional funds. But also, let's look at your operations. Let's take a good, long, hard look of, if this is where we are and we have another 6 months of this, is what you're doing sustainable? I actually talked to a client of ours this morning who is typically they were a daycare center and they were doing things for daycare. Well, guess what? People aren't comfortable bringing their kids out of the house now. So what are they doing? They are pivoting, and they're looking to do some distance learning and providing support to parents who need help getting their children, kind of teaching their children. Now the parents have basically become teachers. They're looking at doing some different things to provide support to parents. And so it's important that you look at whatever your business model is to determine what's really next, because more money isn't, you can't just throw money at the problem. You have to actually figure out what I'm doing sustainable, and can I live through COVID? And if the answer is yes, do people even want what I have? And so if not, you may have to change your business model slightly, because even if it's not COVID, and let's say they come out with the vaccine, people aren't coming out of their house anytime soon in droves. So there is no more normal. This is our new normal in some way, shape, or form or another. So we just have to get used to it and adjust our business.
Right. And I remember a couple of months ago when this first hit, and we were telling people that they need to really get creative and figure out how they were going to pivot. I mentioned the book Who Moved My Cheese, because
Mm-hmm.
it's by Spencer Johnson. And one of the things I really embraced about that book is the fact that it's really a short book, and it's a parable about, I think it's like four mice.
Nice.
and and things change, and so they basically are going through a maze, and when one roadblock hits, they have to figure out who moved the cheese, like how you get to whatever it is how do you get out of the maze, right?
Mhm.
And so business owners right now, I just want you to know, don't get discouraged, because some of the best inventions were actually created during times of crises, right? Some of the best and brilliant minds are developed when you have to become creative. So this goes back to, it's funny because full disclaimer here, Joy is on my advisory board, so she helps me when I'm trying to problem solve and figure out what to do in my business. So if you're a business owner right now and you can't necessarily maybe afford to, I would say, to bring on a full team of people, I've shared with you even last year, the year before last, that you really should have an advisory board, because an advisory board can actually help you navigate through some of the problems that you have. I play basketball. A lot of people know, if you've been following me, that's one of the things I did when I was in college. And I had a very fortunately successful career. So I'm definitely blessed in that respect. But I understood the value of teamwork and
Mhm.
having people on your team that can help to supplement your weaknesses. I wasn't the best shooter at times, but I definitely could consistently rebound, and I definitely, could drive to the hole. But there was people on my team, like I would say Brandy Blunt, Brandy Lemons, and Bernanda Jackson, and I mean just could flat out shoot. And so when I was having an off day and an off game, they picked up the slack and the load was so much easier. So one of the things, if you are a business right now, you could probably implement, if you don't do anything else, is certainly you can implement an advisory board. And I would say to put an advisory board together, no more maybe than three to five people. And you want people that can kind of help you brainstorm and figure out how to navigate and who moved your cheese and get out of this crisis.
No, I think that's great advice.
Yeah. So we're wrapping up because I want to honor Joy's time, and I actually have another meeting also I got to jump into. But to recap what we talked about today, we talked about PPP funding, we talked about the PPP forgiveness application process is,
Mhm.
for some banks, has already come online, but we believe that, it's probably best just to wait to see what Congress actually is going to finally decide with respect to whether or not there's going to be a blanket amount that, if your loan is under, will be able to be forgiven without you
Right.
submitting documentation, which I'm hoping that actually happens, because administratively, I think it's just going to be too much of an administrative burden going back to the banks and having them submit all these applications. So we're hoping Congress, if you're listening, um, that's something that the community, the practitioner community, is certainly on board if you do a blanket forgiveness for under, I would be open to 150,000 or even below or less than that.
A lesser amount.
Yeah, lesser amount. And then the last thing we're just going to talk about, if you didn't get a PPP loan, there's still opportunity to maybe get EIDL and other SBA funding. So we won't go through that today. Maybe next week we will turn back to that. And a couple of things, if you actually, I can talk about it tomorrow. I will be on Brotherly Love with
Ooh.
Jay Wendell Gordon and the Gordon brothers tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And then on Monday, I will also be doing a free webinar through the DC SBDC program. Joy, do you have any information, any upcoming webinars or things you want to share with the audience?
So we are always posting information on our social media and on our website. We do not have any upcoming webinars at this point because we're in a holding pattern. But as soon as we get new information from Congress, we'll probably be doing a couple of webinars in September.
Okay. All right. With that being said, thank you guys for joining in. If you heard some information that you think will bless other people, do me a favor, just hit the share button, pay it forward. I believe knowledge is power, and we want to make sure we get this information out to the community. Thank you guys so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a good one.
Bye.